Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining the Southwest Center for Human Relations Studies at the University of Oklahoma for our monthly webinar series. I am Dr. Jenny Rongo, the Executive Director of the Southwest Center and Director of NCORE, and I'm delighted to be your host today. For those of you joining us for the first time, NCORE offers 2 webinars per month on the first and last Wednesday. Our Emerging Scholars webinars are held on the first Wednesday, and they focus on ideas that speak directly to the experiences of students. These webinars are either facilitated or co-facilitated by a student and are intended to identify emerging scholars. These are always available at no cost. Our next student webinar will be presented on December 2nd with the title, When They See Us, Experiences of Black Males Navigating Historically White Institutions. Please visit our website, www.ncore.ou.edu, for the full list of featured webinars for this session. Use the chat box to tell us where you're joining us from. Also tweet, Instagram, or share with the hashtag NCORE Start the Conversation Online. It is incredibly important for us to stay connected, especially during these uncertain times. I would also want to announce that our call for proposals for NCORE 2021 went out yesterday. Please check out our website and plan to submit a proposal. Our presenters today are Sabina Griffith and Ebony Ramsey. Sabina is a Society of Human Resources Management certified professional and a Diversity First certified diversity professional, CDP. Ebony currently serves as the Assistant Dean for Student Involvement at Maryville University in St. Louis. Their topic today is, and then they came for me and no one was left, the inequities of cancel culture. The center is very grateful for their expertise. Please post questions in the Q&A box and they will address them at the end of the presentation. And just a reminder that closed caption and sign language are available for this broadcast. Please help me welcome Sabrina Griffith and Ebony Ramsey.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today for our presentation. We call this, and then they came for me, and no one was left, the inequities of cancel culture. I am Sabrina Griffith. As was shared, I am a certified diversity professional and a SHRM CP. I'm a higher education professional out of the Tampa Bay area, currently affiliated with the University of Tampa, formerly affiliated with Student Affairs, and I have been doing diversity education as a practitioner and most recently as a consultant. And I've been doing this work over 15 years, so I'm honored to be here today. And my partner?
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ebony Ramsey. I use she, her pronouns. I am at the Maryville University in St. Louis. I'm Assistant Dean for Student Development, and like Sabrina, have been doing social justice work for most of my career. And so I too have a consulting business that I do that's higher education focused and corporate consulting as well. So we are just so excited to be here with you all today and talk about this topic. So first we want to give our land acknowledgement. So Sabrina and I are in 2 different locations, so we're giving land acknowledgements to both of those locations today. So the land at which we inhabit is physically situated in the original ancestral homelands of the Makuxi, Tomakins, and Calusis, Tobacas, and Seminole tribes of Tampa, Florida, and Kickapoo tribes of Kansas City, Missouri. We pay respect to the Makuxi, Tomacan, Calusa, Tacoba, Seminole, and Kickapoo tribes, people, past, present, and future, and their continuing presence in the homeland and throughout their historical diaspora.
So today we are coming to talk to you to talk about cancel culture, of course. And our agenda is as followed. As you've seen, we've already done our land acknowledgement, which is customary and necessary. We are going to start with our overview of cancel culture. For some of you, you may be familiar with it. For others, this might be an introduction to you about the actual culture. We recognize people have been canceling people individually for years. There are songs about canceling back in the 60s. Some of us are familiar with someone being canceled in New Jack City in the 90s, but we are actually going to talk to you about the culture and what that looks like. We'll give you some historical context. We're going to deconstruct it. And then we're going to get into our perception and our understanding of what we believe to be the inequities of cancel culture and what that looks like. That's oversaturation. We're going to talk a little bit about the intent versus the impact, who gets a pass, who decides. And then we're going to give you some tools as we figure out how to fight back at cancel culture. And that's not necessarily saying that we're not supporting people that want to cancel, but are there other ways that we can do this? How can we stand our ground against issues of injustice that is not using cancel culture? And then of course, we will end with a Q&A, so you'll have plenty of opportunity to ask us whatever questions you have related to the topic. I do want to make sure that we do some housekeeping. As was mentioned, we have the chat box, we have the Q&A box, so feel free to drop your questions into that. We do have interpreters available, and I want to make sure we share, there is at least one video in our presentation, so that will include some sound and some light. So if you have any sensitivity, I want to make sure we're upfront about that as well. Thank you for joining us. I'm going to turn it over to Ebony.
All right, all right. So as Sabrina mentioned, Sabrina and I, we always have really great discussions, and we're loyal NCORE folks. We go every year, and so this topic came about for several reasons. In our discussions all the time, we're always like, challenging the status quo and thinking about what is this notion of cancel culture and what is this new phenomenon that's come about. And so that's really how this presentation came about. And so when we started talking about it, we kind of saw that we had very similar views, but they were a little different. And so we wanted to see what the world of higher education thought as well. And if we were just, two people that are in this world and having these conversations, then, what could be out there swirling, or out there, other people are grappling with this notion of cancel culture. And it seemed very pervasive, in our society as a whole. So we want to start with kind of setting the framework of this discussion. And so that's what I'm going to be doing today, is giving you some kind of context around what is cancel culture, and then where did it come from, and how are we seeing it manifest in our society today. So as you can see here, cancel culture is defined as the promotion or promoting the boycott of different people, companies, and or systems for a misalignment of social values. So that's where we're going to take this discussion today. We're going to talk about what are some of those things that we're seeing in the world that have this misalignment. And then we want you to sit with this a little bit as well, and think about, like, where are you at with this notion of cancel culture? How have you responded to it in the past, and how are you situating yourself with the work that we do, and just being people? Like, how are you situating yourself in the world with cancel culture? So in order to do that, we have a poll that we would like for everyone to participate in. So this is going to be interactive today. So you all are going to be participating with us. So you have a poll here that's just been deployed to you. So if you could just take about 5 minutes to answer these quick questions, and then we'll bring it back in a second.
And this poll will give us an opportunity to understand your involvement in cancel culture. We recognize some of us have canceled people, some of us have not. We've never participated in it. So it gives us a little bit of an opportunity to know our audience, and know that if you're like us, you canceled a company because something happened, you canceled an artist because something happened that you could not support. So please enjoy the poll before we move forward.
All right, we should be wrapping up. I'm watching the numbers here. It looks like the majority of folks have answered our poll here. So yes, all right. So you all should be able to see our results here. I'm just going to go through this really quickly so that we can move to the next part. So it says, did you cancel Kevin Hart during the 2019 Academy Awards controversy? So we have an overwhelmingly no there, which is very interesting, contrary to what some of the public thought about that situation. That situation was very broadcast widely. So we have overwhelmingly that our population said no, they did not cancel Kevin Hart. So that's interesting. Did you cancel Kanye West after the 2009 VMAs incident against Taylor Swift? So the whole, interruption of her speech situation, 80% of you all said no, you did not. Okay. Did you cancel Matt Lauer after the 2019 rape sexual misconduct accusations? And we're about 62% that said yes there. So that situation got a little bit more serious, right? So we're seeing some definite misalignment of values there, right? Did you cancel Chick-fil-A after their leadership made statements against the LGBTQ community? 64% said yes there. All right. So we're getting the temperature of our audience. That's really good. All right. Did you cancel Goya after their leader endorsed President Trump? Interesting. So we're split 50-50 on that one. So that's a really interesting talking point. And then let's see here. Did you cancel the NFL in support of Colin Kaepernick boycott? 44% said yes. 56% of you said no. Interesting. Now, flipping that situation, did you cancel Colin Kaepernick for his protest against police brutality during the NFL games? And so overwhelmingly, we see that most of you did not cancel him for that situation. Did you cancel Chris Brown after the Rihanna domestic violence assault? Lots of you did. It looks like 76% said yeah, overwhelmingly yes. And then last but not least, we have two more. Papa John's. It looks like about 46% said that they were cancel Papa John's after the affordable healthcare incident, and then 54%. And then H&M. H&M had the post with the coolest monkey ad. Did you cancel H&M after that? So that was very thank you for participating with us in that poll. It was, we wanted to do that to just help us to set up this conversation and give you all some context of the situations that we've dealt with or that we've seen in the media that have to do with this notion of cancellation, right? And sometimes if you're talking about an idea, it's easy to kind of talk in a theory about that idea, but it's also more helpful if you have some context and you have some solid examples. So we wanted to give you some examples from which we're actually going to be pulling from today in our presentation. So let's go to the next slide here. So we want to give you some historical perspective and tell you kind of what the literature is saying about cancel culture and what it has looked like over time. So as you can see here, we're talking about how cancel culture, it adds to this fabric of what it looks like to be an activist nowadays. So as you can see here, we have this juxtaposition from old school or our original movement, which originated in the civil rights era. So the original way that we showed activism as a world and as a society is coming from these boycotts and sit-ins and marches and having folks that are on the forefront and actual people that are kind of standing up and speaking out in a physical way. So if you're thinking about the historical reference or the historical context of what activism looks like, it was definitely a more physical movement. So it was something that was people in the streets. It was very visual, because we didn't have the technology that we have today. And so the technology that we have today has sparked what, Sabrina and I are calling kind of this new school movement, right? This new school movement of activism that, has more women at the forefront. It takes place via social media. So you have this whole notion of hashtagging or hashtag culture. You also have the flip side of it, which is the fake news culture or different things that come out where you're challenging the reliability and the validity of the information that you're receiving. But you're getting your information and you're seeing this activism much quicker than you may have seen it in the past. So in the past, if you weren't plugged into your radio or watching things on television or physically seeing it outside of your doorstep, you may not know, what's going on. Now you could miss out on a tweet, or you could miss out on someone posting something, but the activism has taken a different toll, a different way. So you're seeing folks do activism through petitions like change.org, or now we're showing boycotting, like where we spend our money, right? And so kind of avoiding those areas or avoiding those people and brands where we spend our money is the modern way of showing movement and activism. So you can go to the next slide. Some more historical perspective of how cancel culture came about. So you're probably asking yourself, like, so how did cancel culture begin? Where did it start from? So similar to how Sabrina opened up the conversation, cancel culture came out of this notion from Twitter, right? So there was a tweet that was made originally, as you can see here on the screen, by a man named Miles McNute. And he's an Old Dominion University professor. And he used the term in 2014 to kind of talk about TV show cancellations. So he wasn't really speaking about what we're talking about today, but he talked about this notion of, cancel culture within our television and renewing TV shows. But then if you fast forward to 2016, 2017, the first time that cancel culture is utilized is to kind of talk about this notion of a situation that happened with Gabby Douglas and Allie Reisman. So Gabby Douglas, Allie Reisman are on our Olympic gymnastics team. And there was a comment about there was a comment made by Gabby Douglas that was taken somewhat out of context. And the funny thing about it is that cancel culture was used in this in this context, but it was also used giving this person some grace. So it says, let's talk cancel culture. Personally, I'm willing to give a lot of grace to young Black girls simply because the world doesn't. I was born reading bell hooks. I had to grow. So does Gabby Douglas, and so do some of you. So even in the first use of the word, there was some grappling there, right? That are we canceling this person based on what they're saying? And was the intent the same as the way it came out? Or is there some, grace that we need to be giving these folks because everybody doesn't have the same starting points? And so that leads me to the literature review and kind of what the literature says. And, I consider myself a scholar practitioner, and so does Sabrina. So we're going to kind of destruct this a little bit for you all today and then see what you think about cancel culture. So you can go to the next slide. So if we're talking deconstructing cancel culture, there were several points that were made that came about as a part of me doing some research on cancel culture. So one thing that the literature is saying is that it really does question the reliability and the validity of the information that we get when we're canceling someone, right? So if it's not captured on a cell phone, if it's not out and about, does it really happen? And so the relatability and the validity of the information that we are receiving in the social media space is very questionable, and it causes folks a lot of pause when you're talking about receiving information on social media. Is it the other point that we are making here with deconstructing cancel culture is how credible is the information that we are receiving? So again, it kind of relates back to the reliability and the validity point there. So how credible are the sources? Who are the folks that are actually putting out the information? Is it coming from a reliable source? And that's where we get this notion of fake news or problematic behavior that's happening in social media spaces because folks are just putting out information as they first get it. So not necessarily doing a lot of research, but if you find out information and you first receive that information, sometimes it is immediately released, and it's so accessible nowadays. It is hard to know if that information is credible. Of course, censorship came up, and Power of influence was also a huge point that the literature was saying. And basically around influence, it said a couple of things. Social media is a space where you can either magnify an issue and make it the best issue in the world, where many folks can find out about it quickly, and it can be amplified and magnified in such a quick way. Or social media can be a place where you magnify an issue that is negative. So this power of influence that social media has is so large and it's so strong that we really have to question and be careful about the information that we put out there in that space. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about here on this slide before I go into our inequities here is, cancellation is really grounded in privilege. And Sabrina and I are going to make some points later to kind of unpack that a little bit. But who decides who gets to be canceled, or who decides what is the level of benchmark, or how do we measure who we are canceling, what situations get canceled? All of that is grounded in privilege to say that someone is allowed to cancel someone else and make whatever they are bringing to the table invalid. And what does that say about us as a society? Is that okay? Is it okay for us to make that decision? And so, like I said, we're going to unpack that a little bit more with our talk today. But those are some of the things that the literature says about cancel culture and about how cancel culture shows up in our space. If you want to go to the next slide. So what we're going to do today is we're going to break this down a little bit, and we have 3 main points that we're going to discuss around: is cancellation equitable? And after we, talked about this and we did the research, we really came down to this question. And we have 3 points that we're going to discuss today to talk about, how do we answer this question? And so we're going to talk about how cancel culture has this element of oversaturation. So we're oversaturating our market with this whole notion of cancel culture. Intent versus impact. So did you win, or who wins? And then the last part is who gets a pass. So who actually gets to decide who is canceled, and who doesn't, or who's a part of situations and then they get a pass for being canceled or not. So it's basically asking who is the moral majority in these situations. All right, next slide. So I'm going to start off with oversaturation, and then I'm going to kick it over to Sabrina to talk about the next 2 points. So when we're talking about this notion of oversaturation, right, there's a couple of folks that I look to talk through this point. So it says originally that cancellation was supposed to be used to either illuminate successes or highlight when someone has done something wrong. So it wasn't originally supposed to be for everyone, right? It was supposed to be for certain instances, either to illuminate things that are successful. So you're talking around brands and places where we spend money that have really poured into the community or done something that we deem as successful. So how do we highlight them? How do we tell, like, hey, go spend your money, or hey, go support this brand? Or if someone has done something wrong, or something that's going back to the definition in a misalignment of values, then how do we highlight that and let them know that that's not what we like, right? And so the cancellation trend just started going so far to where everyone was being canceled. So now cancel culture it started as one thing, but then it became this whole other notion of everybody's canceled and you get canceled for everything. So with that being said, there's pros and there's cons, right? And so the pro to that is that so many people facing cancellation, they lose their job, right? They lose recognition of power. So sometimes this notion of cancellation actually works, right? Because you see immediate return on your investment. But the con to cancel culture is that it could be seen as a very negative thing, suggesting that the consequences of cancellation are too harsh for very minor instances, or they represent rushed judgment on situations. So those are just a couple of things that, I found thinking about this whole notion, of an oversaturated market. It's like sometimes as a people, we start out in this place where this is a meaningful act, but then it starts snowballing and developing and continuing to move and move and move. And now it's become diluted. And so a question that I want you to think of as we are going through our presentation today is, does exiling people or brands really work? Does it really work? Is this something that is a perceived fix, or does it get to the root of the issue? So I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina now. Thank you.
So, canceled and not canceled, as we're having this conversation and we really explore the inequity of the system and the culture of cancel culture, we're seeing that certain people are being canceled and others are not. And they're actually sometimes doing similar things. You'll see on the slide on the screen, we know Jeffrey Epstein was canceled. J.K. Rowling was canceled because J.K. Rowling made some anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ statements that were absolutely inappropriate, to the point that even the actors on her Harry Potter films decided they were going to cancel her and not support her. For some people, quite a few people, Terry Crews might be canceled because of his inappropriate statements, or statements in which people thought that he was not supporting Black initiatives. He was not supporting Gabrielle Union because they had some things going on with America's Got Talent in which he felt like she was inappropriately treated professionally. I know for me, Michael Richards, some of you may recognize the name. He played Kramer on Seinfeld. I enjoyed Seinfeld. I'm a New York girl, thought it was a great show, until I saw his stand-up act in which he got mad at some hecklers in the audience and decided to just drop the N-word as many times as he could to attack them. I personally canceled him, and now I have a tough time watching the show without thinking of that situation. But then we have people that are not canceled. Snoop Dogg has said some inappropriate things about Oprah's best friend, Gail, as she's just doing her job. He got upset about how he felt like she was attacking people like R. Kelly and Bill Cosby, and at some point even called her a dog face. So, but for some reason, he has not been canceled. Jimmy Fallon, it was caught that he previously did some comedy in some blackface. He apologized. He has not been completely canceled. Rihanna, if you are not familiar with her most recent Fenty fashion show, she actually played a song during one of the sets that actually had an Islamic verse, and a number of people were offended by that. Rihanna apologized, people accepted the apology, we've moved forward. I can talk all day about the person who I believe, I'm not a huge Kardashian fan. I think it's a family of people that are a bit of culture vultures and have chosen not to give any credit to the culture that they are trying to make money off of. But people love her. She has millions of followers all over the world despite that, because some people are aware of that and they're okay with it. You have Wendy Williams. Wendy Williams at the beginning of this year, it was around February, made some really inappropriate anti-trans statements, to the point that she said something to the effect of men should not wear skirts and heels. Inappropriate, but people have excused Wendy because this is what she does. This is what she does on her show. And then you have people that are kind of in the middle. Kanye West, some people have decided to cancel Kanye, some people have not. They're still supporting his shoes, they're still supporting his music. Ellen DeGeneres, it came out, people were thinking Ellen was mean. Well, Ellen apologized for the leaders on her team that may have been mean to the staff. So some people are supporting her, and she has a number of celebrities that are supporting her as well. And then some people not. And then for so many of us, Starbucks. Starbucks, we know the incident that happened. It does not need to be shared again. But after that, a lot of people decided they were going to boycott Starbucks. They wanted to see more from the organization. And the organization has had similar incidents happen in which people have been discriminated against from going in there and things like that. But so many of us still need our frappe. So we value something more than our commitment to that cause. And ultimately, we really want you to think about you. I'm sure that there are things that we have done individually that we could potentially be canceled for. So as we're talking cancel culture, we're trying to explore the benefits of canceling people and how it can sometimes be so final that it does not necessarily allow for an opportunity for growth. And what if you were the next person that was canceled? We do want to encourage you to journal, take some notes. I know that there are some comments being shared in the chat and Q&A as well, if the staff can share that information with us as necessary. But we want you to take some notes. Start thinking about how these situations make you feel. As we're sharing these examples, have you decided to cancel? And what is the benefit? So we want to move forward to talking a little bit about intent versus impact. So someone has done something and it's had some impact on someone, but then let's take it a step further. We have cancel culture. Cancel culture has an intent. What is the impact though? Does anyone ever win when we actually participate in cancel culture? And I like the slide on the screen because it talks about how it started. I heard your question. I listened a little bit, but how it's going is now I'm offended. I'm ticked off. And I've gone from gentle, kind person to the Hulk. And sometimes that can be the effect of cancel culture. So we're going to start with an example for you of Kevin Hart. We started that earlier. We shared that a little bit earlier, but we want to make sure that we really break it apart and unpack that a little bit so you can see what we're really talking about with this particular situation.
Just 2 days after being named host of the 2019 Academy Awards, comedian and actor Kevin Hart is stepping down from his duties. There's been an outcry over his past homophobic tweets, and Hart says he doesn't want to be a distraction. CTV's Aaron Paul is following this story for us today. Aaron, this is a real shocker and a real swift turn of events for Kevin Hart, who said it was one of his life goals to host the Academy Awards.
Exactly. Just on Tuesday, to your point, Marcia, he called this an opportunity of a lifetime. But things certainly have changed. The Academy of Motion Pictures, Arts and Sciences giving Hart an ultimatum. This is shortly after announcing him as the host of the 2019 Oscars. They said, apologize for the past tweets or we will find another host. Now, Hart elected not to apologize, instead posting this video to Instagram where he explained his position.
I've addressed this several times. This is not the first time this has come up. I've addressed it. I've spoken on it. I've said where the rights and wrongs were. I've said who I am now versus who I was then. I've done it. I've done it. I'm not going to continue to go back and tap into the days of old when I moved on and I'm in a completely different space in my life. We feed in the internet trolls and we reward them. I'm not going to do it, man. I'm going to be me. I'm going to stay in my ground. Regardless, Academy, I'm thankful and appreciative of the opportunity. If it goes away, no harm, no foul.
So what type of tweets are we talking about? Well, many have been deleted, but screenshots of them have been widely circulated on the internet. One, for example, says, if my son tries to play with my daughter's dollhouse, I'm going to break it over his head and say in my voice, stop, that's gay. Earlier in his career, Hart's stand-up specials often included jokes about homosexuality, several of them deemed homophobic. Marcia.
So we know now that he has said sorry, but he initially wasn't so apologetic. And I just have to say, as someone rightly pointed out in our morning meeting, would the Academy have looked into all this stuff?
Everything is out there. It's on the internet. Wouldn't you be clearly vetting your host? Because we've seen so much of this in this day and age. Absolutely. So certainly some blame to be put on the Academy. But meantime, Hart did initially defend his position on Instagram up until Thursday, saying that his critics should stop being negative about his earlier anti-gay remarks and that he had grown and he had changed.
If you want to hold people in a position where they always have to justify or explain their past, and do you? I'm the wrong guy, man.
Soon after that, though, he went on to Twitter to officially step down, saying, I do not want to be a distraction on a night that should be celebrated by so many amazing, talented artists. I sincerely apologize to the LGBTQ community for my insensitive words from my past. He also said, I'm sorry that I hurt people. Much love and appreciation to the Academy. I hope we can meet again. So far, though, silence from the Academy. In fact, their Twitter page still full of retweets of Kevin Hart's hosting announcement and how
just 2 days after being named host of the 2019.
So, Kevin Hart, we saw Kevin Hart said some inappropriate things that offended people when they caught wind of it. And for me, I look at cancel culture is cyclical in nature. So I want to kind of break down this specific situation with Kevin Hart. Kevin Hart, I define as the target because he was the person that people tried to cancel. He made a statement, he did something wrong. He did something that offended people. It's either can be making a statement, it can be creating a policy in the event of Papa John's or something like that. And then you have the victim. The victim is the person that experienced harm or offense. So in the Kevin Hart situation, you had members and allies and supporters of the LGBTQ+ community that were extremely offended by what was said. Insert cancel culture. Now, the people that have been offended have decided they are going to facilitate an empowered and impactful response to the target. We want to do something to get you to understand how you have harmed us. And for some people, it's any type of boycott. It's we're not supporting your brand. We are not buying your product. We do not want to see you on this stage. So they decided he should not be participating in the Academy Awards. He received that negative attention as the target and that impact on his brand. And that was really tough for him, but it was a lesson. People are harmed, so now they want you to experience some type of loss. So then the victim then causes increased awareness of the incident and potential increase in harm because other people have now been impacted. This is not, I'm hurt and I'm going to tell you that I'm hurt. This is, I'm using my platform to make sure other people are aware of this. And now that new awareness may trigger some other people. So now you have multiple victims, which is what's contributing to this culture of cancel culture. And then in this particular case, again, when I say it's cyclical, you then have that target that makes a new statement or creates a new policy. And we've seen things that have been performative in nature. I'm going to come up with something, I'm going to say something, I'm going to apologize, we're going to create a position, whatever that is, that's going to respond. But sometimes that doesn't work. Sometimes people are more offended after that. And in this particular situation, I know I watched Kevin Hart's documentary, not the current one, but there was one earlier this year in which he actually they followed him during this incident. And people had been telling him all along, you know, you need to apologize. You've hurt feelings. And he had a woman who identified herself as gay on his team, on his advisory team, on his staff, that in the documentary had been kind of like following and kind of tiptoeing of, this is not good, but what do you want to do? And then ultimately, based on the documentary and how it was cut, before he apologized, this woman said to him, these people just met you. What you did 10 years ago might be who you were 10 years ago, but they just met you yesterday. So the people that you may have apologized to 10 years ago, 5 years ago, might not even be a part of this conversation. It's the people that just met you. This harm is fresh for them. So this is why people are making a big deal about it. And this is why you should consider apologizing. And that was a lesson for him in that moment. For me, professionally, I run a victim advocacy program. So I work with victims of violence, victims of harm. And what's important is when we talk about cancel culture, we recognize that there is some harm. We've said this several times, and people have been victims of that harm. It's important that we don't forget that anyone can be a victim. Primary and secondary trauma can lead to negative perceptions of and reactions to triggers. You don't know why I'm upset. Maybe you need to get to know why I'm upset. But I might not even be the person that you intended to harm with your statement. So Kevin Hart thought he was just making a joke. And what is unknown can be harmful. What one person considers a joke, another may consider an attack. He thought it was funny. These people weren't in that audience and probably would not have been in that audience for his comedy at that time, or maybe even now. But they were the butt of the joke. They were offended. We have to recognize that certain behaviors can be responses to trauma. Even with cancel culture, people are like, why are you so angry? Why is it such a big deal? Why do you have to get all of your followers involved in this conversation? Well, that's how I deal with trauma. That is my response. But it's important not to tell a victim how to react to trauma. You can simply help them manage their responses in ways that are not harmful to them. And that's why we wanted to talk cancel culture today, because what we found is with the inequities of it, there are some people that are participating in cancel culture that are actually being harmed through that participation because there's no growth. When you decide that you're just going to completely cut someone off, they're not necessarily learning. All they know is they lost money. I made people mad and now I'm not getting any money, but they don't understand why you made them mad. They don't understand the harm in that situation. So for so many of us, as we're trying to create senses of belonging, trying to build communities, it's important for people to learn from their mistakes so that they don't repeat them. I know a lot of people have been saying that recently, like the best apology is learning from your behavior so you don't repeat it. It's not sending out a statement and saying, I apologize. As we mentioned earlier, we want you to take your notes. We want to give you this journal question, some things for you to think about how cancel culture impacts you specifically or how you've engaged. So the journal question is, describe the things that cause you the greatest identity-related stress. What strategies do you use to manage this stress? It may be cancel culture, it may be some other things. So let's continue as we think about the victims and the people who have targeted others through cancel culture. One of the things that Ebony and I talked about when we first started exploring this was who gets a pass. You'll see on the screen, we have 3 different sets of pictures and 3 different situations that we felt like really highlighted the inequity of cancel culture. So the first one is Janet Jackson and Justin Timberlake, that Super Bowl situation in which they had choreography they had practiced. And at the end of the choreography, Janet Jackson's breast was exposed and people were offended. It's the Super Bowl. There are children watching and they're adults who were just offended by seeing someone else's breast watching on television. It's not okay. But what we did see was Justin Timberlake apologized, Janet Jackson apologized, but Janet Jackson lost a lot of opportunities in the year, maybe few years following that, because she got a lot of the blame. It's her fault. Even though Justin is the one who pulled it off her chest, off of her costume, it was her fault. So it was almost like Justin got a pass. We forgive him, he made a mistake, but Janet, how dare you? Then we also see another situation. Super Bowls are just very popular. This past year, we had Jennifer Lopez and Shakira performing at the Super Bowl. And I remember having a conversation at work about how many people had contacted the Super Bowl and the SEC and all different organizations because they were offended by how much buttock was shown and how much gyration was happening in the performance. Yet, we did not get the same level of complaints when Maroon 5 performed and Adam Levine had no shirt on. I'm an Adam Levine fan. I've had Adam Levine screensavers on my desktop. But how fair is that? That Adam Levine has gotten a pass and he can be bare-chested out, but Jennifer Lopez cannot dance in a leotard on stage for millions of people. And then, of course, we brought up the Colin Kaepernick situation a few times, but I like this picture because I think it highlights what people value and how cancel culture comes into the things we value. Tim Tebow, Tebowing, that's what it was called. Before, when he was an NFL player, he wanted to make sure people understood how important it was for him to practice his faith and how important it was for him to kneel before he played, to talk to his God about what was about to happen, protect him, whatever that might have been. So we had already seen football players kneeling back when Tim Tebow did it. However, Colin Kaepernick thought it was important to do the same thing. And I know we've seen pictures of Martin Luther King and his crew of people decades ago also kneeling. Colin felt like this is something I value, this struggle around preventing police brutality and racial injustice. And I want to attract attention to it in the best way that I know how. However, we found that Tim Tebow was applauded by many people for kneeling on a field and displaying his religious affiliation and his Christian beliefs. But Colin Kaepernick was blackballed by many people for kneeling on a field and sharing his values as well. So how do we determine who gets a pass? What inequities do we see with that? And then with that also, it's important for us to determine who decides who gets a pass and who decides who's actually canceled. And one of the things that Ebony mentioned earlier that we've been talking about is the power of privilege. So many of us are familiar with the concept of intersectionality, and we come to the table with varying identities, but we recognize that through those identities, there are some that rise a little bit higher when it comes to the power and privilege of being affiliated with that identity. So sometimes you find situations in which two different people have done the same egregious act, but one is affiliated with a group in privilege, so they kind of get a pass. They're not getting the same attention, or we're just gonna let the legal system handle it. And then the other one does not have that same thing. There is clearly power in privilege. And with that, we end up coming into the situation of, I know we hear this so much, even in NCORE, the oppression Olympics. So we have a situation in which a number of people are offended. I can be offended based on my gender. I could be offended based on an attack against my race. I can be offended based on an attack against my religion or non-religious affiliation. And as was mentioned, a couple people said it in the chat, we intentionally gave you some of these examples because we wanted the examples to be black and white, but we know that there's a gray. And there are reasons why some of these people that we mentioned were canceled for other reasons. And I'm glad that people picked up on that, because for us, this is an example of the oppression Olympics. I may have seen something else in a situation in which I've decided I want to cancel that person. I know what everyone else is mad about, but I'm offended that this happened. I'm canceling them for a different reason. But however, there is an identity group that is getting more attention to their cause than the identity group that I am paying attention to, that I am speaking for. So that's how we get into the problem with things like oppression Olympics, because we never know who's being canceled, who's making the decision, who has the followers in order to actually cancel someone. I might have a couple hundred people following me on Instagram. Ebony might have a couple of thousand. That means that her reach is a lot broader than mine. I may have a valid reason to bring attention to a situation, but if I don't have the followers, it might not go anywhere at all. So that is another part of the inequity of cancel culture, because we're still trying to deal with our own oppression Olympics and the games we play in between identity groups that are fighting for justice. So now we're going to move forward, and I'm going to turn it over to Ebony as we start really talking about fighting back at cancel culture. And I want to be clear, we're not saying cancel culture is wrong. We're trying to consider what are alternatives for us to address these injustices and use our power and authority to make change that don't include cancel culture.
I think Sabrina really hit on a lot of different things. So one of the things that, we talked about is we wanted to give you all some nuggets or some takeaways of things that we felt that could help you in combating some of this, or at least, asking the question and posing the question when some of these situations may come your way. I mean, around the dinner table, in the office, around the water cooler, just in daily life. So one of the first things that we considered with cancel culture is, thinking about what is really the root of the work that we do as educators. And I can take it a step further and say, what is the root of the work that we do as social justice advocates and leaders? And, one of the things that research told me, and I looked up a couple of different things, but Marshall states that the fabric of social justice work is grounded in accountability. And so one of the things that one of the notions that I've been grappling with is it cancel culture or is it accountability? And as you can see here, I found these two visual examples of what that means. And so what does accountability really look like, right? To me, I think accountability looks at looking at the situation for what it is and deconstructing or really interrogating some of the the systems that bring these inequities to light, so there are entire groups of people that are being systematically stifled and silenced from participation. And then there's this exposure of these failures of these systematic things. So systematic racism is prevalent. We have all of these larger entities that come into play when we're talking about this act of cancellation. So these systems really protect people in power, right? And so one of the notions that I feel that would help possibly with taking a different look on what accountability could look like is actually looking to the justice system. And so we looked at concepts around restorative justice practices. And one of the things that I want to share with you all about restorative justice first is restorative justice is a process by which all parties with a stake involved in a particular offense come together collectively as a community on how to deal with the aftermath of that offense, right? And Tony Marshall has some really good work around restorative justice that we pulled from, but also I pulled from a historian Zaire, which talked about the fundamental premise of restorative justice paradigm is that the crime in violation of people the crime is a violation of people and relationships rather than merely a violation of the law. And to me, before I continue on there, that really sticks out to me, thinking of the reasons that some of these folks are making these statements or doing these injustices really come down to the fact that they are damaging relationships, that it's not necessarily just they're breaking the law, which in some cases they are breaking the law. So let's not, skirt over that, but they're severing the relationship. And that is where the restorative justice work can come into play, because it says the most appropriate response to criminal behavior, therefore, is to repair the harm caused by the wrongful act. And that's where I think that restorative justice practices can really come into play when you're speaking about re-victimization. Like, how long do we hold these folks accountable for this one act? Like, are we going back? I know that if somebody probably went back 10 years on me to see some of the things that I thought and said 10 years ago, I would not, I would probably be shunned as well. So is there a statute of limitations around how long we cancel someone, or how far back do we go in someone's history to cancel them? And I think all of that is relative, right? It depends on what the situation is, what the violation is, what they've done, what they've said, how they've reacted to it. But it does give us something to think about around how we are holding people accountable. Are we holding them accountable to say, yes, like exiling you is one thing. So I can just say, hey, I'm just not going to listen to your music. But does that artist own the masters to their music? Like, does that make a difference if you stop listening to their music or not? Or how can we hold them accountable in other ways to show that what they did was wrong and it doesn't fall in alignment with my value set, so therefore I'm choosing this way? Or how can we as educators take part in educating folks on what they did wrong, or helping them to correct the action? So it goes back exactly to what Sabrina was talking about around re-victimization and constantly victimizing, or constantly holding folks accountable in ways over and over again, just rather than correcting the issue at hand.
Ebony, I wanted to piggyback on what you were saying, because Ebony and I have talked about this, and someone also mentioned this in the chat, the R. Kelly situation. R. Kelly has not been completely canceled. There are people that are trying to bail him out of jail. There are people protesting, free R. Kelly. But again, like Ebony brings up a good example. R. Kelly doesn't own his masters. So not listening to his music may not harm him, because it may not be taking money out of his pocket. But I choose not to listen to the music because I've been familiar with the R. Kelly case for a number of years. And when I listen to certain songs, I think of certain children, and I think that's inappropriate. That is how I deal with it. Now, R. Kelly does not know that Sabrina Griffith is not listening to his music, but it's necessary for me. I do not want to be triggered in that way. So that's why it's really about us figuring out what is the overall goal. The overall goal might be self-care, because I cannot impact his pockets as one person. And that's why we want to move forward a little bit. Ebony, if I can switch gears, great.
Absolutely, absolutely.
to really start talking about the overall goal. And the first thing that we want to explore is how can we affect change for our society, affect change for our community in ways that does not use cancel culture. And we enjoy the Gandhi quote that says, the power of nonviolent resistance can only come from honest working of the constructive program. So we bring in constructive resistance. This is another takeaway for you. Constructive resistance are initiatives in which people start to build a society they desire independently of the dominant structures already in place. And we've done some deep diving into Sorensen's work, so I'm going to be quoting a lot of their stuff today. The basis for constructive resistance is construction and resistance. It's really just that simple. Construction, it's making sure that there are some consequences, making sure that it's solution oriented. It's collaborative. There's an opportunity to collaborate on both sides, but also collaborating within your community. It's about building inclusive organizations and experimenting with processes to implement inclusion. And then the resistance part of constructive resistance is about it being confrontational. And it could be discreet, it could be covert, it could be overt, it could be anything. There are a lot of different ways to resist, and cancel culture is an example of resistance. It's pushing against the status quo. Things have been this way forever, and that's the way it's going to be. No, I'm not okay with that. We want some change. So we are going to build organizations that we're going to explore, what do we need? What do we need to enact change on the larger level? That might be an employee resource group. That might be a safe space for your group to really just talk about your interests and your needs and gather those ideas together to then go with a formulated plan to that leadership team. It could be boycotting, it could be protests, it could be civil unrest. It looks so many different ways, but really it comes down to agency. When you're actually participating in constructive resistance, agency is what we end up with. An agency is defined as action or intervention, especially such as to produce a particular effort. And Sorensen talked about 3 different ways that we see agency show up through constructive resistance. And that could be deferment. I'm just gonna bide my time. I am not comfortable with this situation. Maybe I need to move out of my home. I am not going to fight whatever the authority is saying that I need to do. I'm just going to bide my time until the tide changes for me. And so if you're telling me I have to move out of my home, I'm going to wait until a new home comes available, and then I'm just going to move. I'm not going to interact. I'm not going to take a whole lot of energy. It's okay. Eventually something will come up for me. Then you also have protests, agency and protests. Keep fighting until you wear them down. Whenever I say wear them down, I think of Steve Urkel and Laura years ago, but really it's, I'm gonna keep protesting. I'm going to keep making sure that my interest is visible, is audible. Everyone knows what I need. And eventually we know for a lot of different institutions, protest works. That bad press, people standing in front of your building may get you to make some change. And then we also have acquiescence. And that's really using your resources. So that might be, if you're telling me I have to do something differently, okay, well, I'm just gonna go out and I'm going to find what I need with the resources I have. So an example would be, I have no food. I have no food, I have no money to access food. And where I live, they are not trying to help me figure that out. Well, I know that I probably have a little bit of money to go buy some seeds and some vegetables. And there's some dirt right outside my back window. I'm going to go ahead and plant my own garden. If you are not going to give me what I need, I'm going to use the resources I have to meet my needs. And that's really what Sorensen is talking about with constructive resistance. That is a way that we can fight back against these social injustices and make sure that we're getting our needs met. Not necessarily engaging with the person that's harmed us. We're just going to keep it moving, but we're still going to get our needs met. Another thing that we want to explore outside of addressing the needs of society or needs of a group is really, as I talk victimology and working with people that have been impacted and have been harmed, is really, what do we need as individuals? So as individuals, one of the things that we wanted to consider is really building resilience. We know resilience to be the ability to overcome adversity or trauma. So I'm triggered by something someone has said, I am harmed by something someone has said, and I need and can find a reason to build my own resilience, which prepares me in how I best respond to that. And different ways that you can build resilience is determining what is your vision? What is your purpose? You know, this person has said this to harm this identity that I affiliate with, but how does that really impact me? And where am I trying to go? It's regulating your emotions and learning how to keep your composure, staying calm, staying in control. We all know that when you're emotional, sometimes you might make inappropriate decisions. It's hard to argue when you're emotional because that logic kind of goes out the window. Also, reasoning. It's helping you with your problem solving. It's helping you find those resources that I mentioned when it comes to constructive resistance. Health, getting that sleep, exercising, working on your nutrition. When you're unhealthy, you're not bound to make the most logical decisions. And if you're under attack, you need to be in a healthy space. Tenacity, it's that persistence. So it's going to take some time sometimes, often, to really push through some of these challenges. And having that tenacity, I'm not going to give up. I know I'm going to find a home. I know I'm going to find some food. You need to be able to have that realistic optimism that it's actually going to work out despite what those in power and authority are saying. And then, of course, finding those supportive networks, managing those perceptions around you, collaborating with others. Building resilience is important because resilient people, and we found this from the daily work, and I like to use this a lot because we're talking about building resilient students on our campus. Resilient people see challenges. They're not surprised when things go wrong. They're already preparing for that, but they're committing to their goals. I know where I want to end up, and I'm focusing on what I can control. That challenge is going to come. Let me stay over here so I can try to avoid that. They don't blame themselves. Something happened, someone says something inappropriate. Kevin Hart has gone on and made this inappropriate commentary regarding the LGBTQ plus community. That is not a reflection of the community. That is a reflection of his lack of learning, his lack of understanding. That does not mean the LGBTQ plus community now needs to look at themselves and say, well, what should we have done differently? No, resilient people don't blame themselves. They're empathetic. They recognize sometimes you're just ignorant. You don't get it. Is this my fight to fight? Or can you learn in a different way? And they think positively. They can identify that this is not where it ends. There is some opportunity for us to overcome this. There is some opportunity for us to pass this situation, and things are going to get better. And when it comes to cancel culture, being resilient is important because for resilient people, they see things like this and they don't automatically jump to it. I think of an example that actually happened this week. Some of you may be familiar with Eva Longoria, did an interview and said some things that people took as offensive to the Black woman community. She was saying that Latinx women were the ones who saved the election. And I need to be clear, they're the ones who did this. And what I saw that I was very impressed with is Rosa Clemente, who's spoken at NCORE before. Once she saw that video, posted on her social media page and said, I am troubled by this. I have already tried to reach out and I'm trying to get a connection with Eva Longoria so I can explain to her what is wrong with this statement. Rosa did not go on social media and say, this is unacceptable and we need to cancel her. And because of Rosa's connections, she was able to get that conversation with Eva Longoria within minutes or hours of actually seeing that interview and explain to her one-on-one the learning that she needed to have and the harm that she created by the statement that she made. And ultimately, again, in the same day, Eva Longoria put out a public statement of, wait, that's not what I meant. And I did not mean any harm. And I am not trying to disrupt the work that we are trying to do. To me, that is an example of resilience of someone like Rosa Clemente, who's been doing this work and is not easily shaken, but also that constructive resistance. I'm going to work with some people. I'm going to do the work that I need to do to impact this, but I'm also going to give everyone else a little bit of support in, I recognize that this is wrong, but this is not where we sit. It can get better. So for us, it's really important to really kind of wrap it up in a bow. And when we came up with this title, Niemeyer's poem is one of my favorite poems, especially when I have conversations regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging. And then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. I think about growing up and hearing people say people in glass houses should not throw stones. There's always going to be a time that us, in our lack of understanding of things that are not connected to us, that we may harm someone. What we really want you to consider is canceling the best way for us to learn from those mistakes? We've offered you constructive resistance. We've offered you resilience that has prepared you to have some conversation. And we showed the picture earlier of the Real Housewives of Atlanta cast member that was like, who's gonna check me, boo? And there's a double entendre with the term came, because if I didn't send for you, don't come for me. That's another thing that people say in slang. If someone comes for you, if someone challenges you, if someone's uncomfortable with what you've said, and then they say, I'm canceling you, you don't have an opportunity to even speak to this anymore, how do you know what that impact really was? What happens when there is no one left to speak for you? Ebony?
Real quick, we just wanted to leave you with some self-reflection journal questions here. Take a moment and screenshot them if you'd like, and just so that you can continue the conversation with your family, with your coworkers, anyone that you want to entertain this with. I know we're going into the holidays, and I know that there'll be lively conversation. So these are just some self-reflection questions that we have for you to just continue the conversation, right? And so the next slide is our references, and we are going to make our presentation available to everyone after the webinar has been completed. And thank you. What questions do you all have?
Thank you so much, Sabrina and Ebony. So your presentation was so empowering, but it also reminds me of the calling in versus the calling out concept. And repairing harm, I think that is so critical today, repairing the harm and finding ways not just to put down, but to restore those relationships. There are a few questions here, and we do have a few minutes. So I'm just going to read the question, and either of you can respond. How do we overcome oppression Olympics and instead find ways to come together and support one another in productive ways?
Good, such a good question. You want to start, Sabrina, or do you want me to?
Sure. Again,
Okay.
I think what we're finding is that as we move into these conversations of creating belonging, and I'm sorry, I lost the question. I think it moved to answered. But as we start talking about creating spaces of belonging, it is very important to get people to understand that your challenge, the bias that you have been victimized by, the injustice that you've seen is not necessarily any worse or any better than mine. The fact that we're both facing injustice is the problem. And how can we advocate for each other? How can we support each other in making sure that we're creating a culture and a society that is eradicating injustice in general? So I really like that we've really moved into conversations away from allyship and really teaching people how to be accomplices. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, when we talk about intersecting identities and our multiple identities, there are certain spaces in which I have some privilege. And my privilege, based on my education, maybe my authority at work, whatever that might be, can benefit someone next to me, and them the same with me. And I think if we can actually try to figure out collaboratively how we can dismantle these systems of injustice, regardless of the impact on me, the impact on you, how I deal with it, because you don't know how much I'm impacted because maybe I don't really talk to you about it. It's the bigger issue. And I think it's really about creating those relationships, that sense of belonging, that connection. Sometimes, you know, people say misery loves company. Sometimes that connection across the fact that we both recognize injustice, that can really help people to work together to dismantle the greater issue. So that's what I would offer.
Yeah, and I think Sabrina said it really well. I think the only other thing that I would offer is something that you just said, Dr. Guru. I think there's this lack of empathy that happens around the work of social justice. It's, you know, Sabrina and I talk about it all the time. And one of the notions that I grapple with all the time as someone who believes in this work is, you know, can I be checked, right? Can I be checked at sometimes when I am still learning and still growing as a social justice advocate and as a person that is continuing to learn? What happens when I make a mistake? And I think that the Oppression Olympics is a great example of us always measuring our worth based off of if we get it right. And I don't think that it's important for us to always get it right. I think that there's learning that happens in those moments. That's why I you know, spoke about the restorative justice piece. I just think that we as a people have to give grace in times to let someone know you messed up, but hey, how can we make this better? And that's why the notion of canceling to me is counterproductive. You know, is it really doing what it's meant to do? And so I really think that us, you know, us as social justice advocates need to keep that in mind. Like, you know, at any point in time, could we be called out on something that we did, and how would we feel in that moment as well? So just another side of the perspective to present.
Mm-hmm. And Rora did make a comment and say that women's bodies are always so tightly policed.
Yeah.
And maybe that goes to you saying that, you know, who cancels you and who should be canceling who, and who is being canceled a lot. Maybe women are being canceled more than men are. So there is another question here. Has cancel culture always been about punishing, or has it ever been used as a way to directly make change with specific demands, such as the BDS movement in South Africa? I'm not sure about what the BDS movement is. If the person who asked the question can just put in the chat or in the questions.
Yeah, I really like this question because last night when I was preparing for this, I had asked one of my friends kind of this same question. And I do think that cancel culture has elements to make us think that there is a temporary, there's temporary fixes to long lasting problems. And so that's why when I was talking about restorative justice and we're talking about this whole notion of resilience and community resistance, what is the long game of cancel culture? How does this end? How do we prepare ourselves to lay the groundwork so that we're not here again? And I think that there have been immediate results, like what the attendee is referring to, that give us this notion of a temporary fix, right? But I think I'm more interested in what's the end game? What's the long game? How do we make lasting change rather than just immediate change all the time? Like immediate change is amazing, and sometimes I think that it's warranted. But what is the end result, and how can we lay a foundation so that we're not continuing to make these decisions?
So I know you talked about restorative justice and repairing harm, but I'm wondering, sometimes people may be so hurt, the trauma may be, you know, so intense and has accumulated over time that they've given up. Can you speak a little bit more about restorative justice and how people can actually open their hearts and minds to it?
Absolutely. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that, because in some of the work that Tony Marshall, for those out there listening, has some wonderful, wonderful work on this. And again, our references will be available, but you know, he talks about the hurt that is caused. And so I think that that's why restorative justice has been seen as a collaborative and a community effort. And I don't think that restorative justice automatically is immediate. I think that it's something that needs to happen over time. And I think that you have to have buy-in. So there has to be some kind of remorse, some kind of reciprocity. To me, it's a give and take. You have to show that you are even remorseful, and repair the relationships. What we saw in Sabrina's example with Kevin Hart, it took his publicist to really make the connection between the head and the heart for him to see that what he did caused harm, and it was traumatic for a large group of people. But, in my mind, I think that it is something that it takes time, especially if it's rooted in systematic racism and oppression that's been happening for years. So, I don't suggest that it's something that's immediate, but I do think that it takes time. What do you think, Sabrina?
I want to say also, I think, again, one-on-one canceling, if I decide, Ebony is my friend and we disagree about something and I'm just not going to talk to her anymore, that's one thing. And it's so final. I'm just not going to talk to you anymore. I think the reason why we really wanted to bring up the conversation of cancel culture is because there's a group of people that have believed that everything should be so final. And again, it does not allow for learning. So I'm glad that Ebony brought back up the Kevin Hart situation, because there was no learning for him before that. All he kept hearing was, people are mad at me and they don't want to see me, have this opportunity. And then again, when we get into the Oppression Olympics, you have people that are saying what you did was wrong, but then you have other people saying, well, but this is a Black man who gets to have this stage and we really need this. And the whole message is being lost because it's really about, we just want to stop you from having this stage, when his person brought to it, this is harm to someone who just met you yesterday. That's when he got it. So I think it's important for everyone to understand that this is not about solely one-on-one canceling. This is about, I want a group of people to stop you in your tracks so that you cannot do anything, and the possibility that there's no learning with that. So when it was brought up earlier about boycotting, divestment, and sanctions, there's a process in that. And that process is set up for there to be actual learning. There are multiple consequences in that. There are multiple conversations and communication. The challenge with cancel culture recently has been few conversations and we just want to cancel you. That's why you had the hashtag movement, hashtag cancel Sabrina, whatever that might be. And that's why we're trying to encourage that conversation to go a step further, because again, people are more likely to repeat those mistakes if we don't encourage that conversation.
And I think this question from Judy is really good, and we want to hear your insights on this one. If validation or reputation is derived through a process of social construction, shouldn't cancellation be expected? Should the people who support you have greater agency than those who disagree with you?
Yeah, great question, Judy. This notion of cancellation is new. So the expectation of it, to me, I'm still grappling with that because it's a new concept. So, prior to less than 10 years ago, we didn't even do this. We might have been boycotting. We might have been doing other things to show like a lack of support. So possibly, I think that's my first answer with looking at what you say. The second part said about, let me look back because it moved again, sorry. It said, oh yeah, should the people who support you have greater agency than those that disagree with you? I think that's a natural, it's natural to side and to be on the same side with those who agree with you. And if I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, and I hope that I am, for me, I think the discourse from having folks that do disagree with you can challenge your thinking there. It can challenge like, well, did I make the right decision? Is this something that I should be doing, should not be doing? And really cause you to really break apart and think about what the situation is as a whole. I mean, for me, like we said it at the beginning of this, we're not coming, to you all today to say that this doesn't happen. We know that it happens, but we're asking you to really think about what is the purpose? What is the goal? And does it really get to the root cause? I think those are questions that we could all continue to think about.
And I think this is a very trivial example, but it's one of the things that I think about in pop culture. Again, the Ellen DeGeneres situation. A number of people described Ellen as a mean girl. And even some celebrities said that. And Ellen, as I said earlier, was able to say, well, I take responsibility for what my team has done to create this hostile work environment, but didn't really spend a lot of time on what she may have done. And then she had these loud celebrity voices that kept saying, well, Ellen's my friend, especially someone like Kevin Hart, because Ellen did the same thing for him with the Academy Awards controversy. I do not think that that's beneficial for Ellen. So I definitely agree with the statement that was being made, because your friends are now saying, and there's some benefit for your friends, obviously, and your supporters are now saying, but it's okay. It's okay. There still needs to be some learning. And I think, again, we all need to have that opportunity to kind of look in the mirror and say, what am I supposed to learn from this situation? There are plenty of things that people say about us that we may disagree with, but I learned as an undergraduate, you can argue about what you said, but you can't argue about how you made someone feel.
Mm-hmm.
There has to be some learning in that. So I put that onus also on their circle, because no, I do not think that their circle should have more influence. I think their circle should be taking responsibility too and encouraging them to take responsibility.
So we do have a few minutes, and I'm going to combine the last two questions. Probably there will be the next two might be our last, depending on how much time we have. But thoughts on how to respond when allyship, accomplishment is measured by willingness to join in on cancel culture. And the writer says, I've been experiencing this with the students canceling their peers who don't buy into canceling someone who's made a misstep, thereby not allowing space for learning and growth. This is great information, and as an advisor to students, I can identify cancel culture habits, but I find that my students overwhelmingly deny that they are contributing to this culture. Do you have any thoughts on how we could approach this issue? So those are two questions, but almost asking the same thing.
I can go first, Ebony. I have had a lot of these conversations recently. We started a bias education resource team for our institution about 2 years ago. And as the chair of that team, we really are encouraging conversations around diversity, equity, inclusion, and really exploring bias. And we did find that people that were victims of bias were just like, either I don't want to deal with it, or this person did this and I'm canceling them, whatever that looks like. And what we have decided, and especially looking at what other institutions are doing, is we want it to be a resource team. We want it to be a resource for learning. So although in the nature you're responding when an incident happens, our role as a resource team is to facilitate those conversations that people were not going to have on their own. So you report that there's a bias incident, we're receiving that information. We're talking to you about that harm. We're exploring to you, especially with restorative justice, what are you looking for? But one of the main questions that I ask is, what is the opportunity for this person to learn? Because if we don't go anywhere for this, it could happen again. And then what does that mean for you as a member of our community if it happens to you again? So really encouraging them to be a part of that, be a part of the solution, as we're working towards that learning. So that's just one way how we do it at my institution, constantly having those conversations with students, faculty, and staff about the impact of their actions on individuals, on the community. Where can we go from here?
I really want to squeeze this one in before we wrap up. And I want both of you to reflect on this and maybe just summarize the broadcast here. Can cancel culture be linked as a factor for increased political polarization in the US? Are we as social justice advocates in some way responsible for the hostile political culture?
When I saw that question come through, Jesse, I was like, come on, Jesse. Like that's a great question. You know, Yes, I definitely think that cancel culture, I won't even narrow it down to just political polarization, but I think that it is very decisive in nature. And so to me, that is one of the reasons why Sabrina and I thought that this would be a great way for us to open up the conversation, as how are we utilizing people, brands, power of influence to further separate ourselves, right? But the other side of that coin is that some of those situations, if we're going back to what we talked about at the beginning, the notion of cancel culture and what it was originally subscribed to do was to make influence. It was to show, like, let's highlight these folks, and let's all pursue not supporting them or supporting a situation. So I think that if we could get back to the roots of what it is and not dilute the concepts or overly assign, in my opinion, I just think that we have done what we do, in our society. We've overdone this concept. So if we could possibly get back to the original roots of where cancel culture, came from, that it wasn't supposed to be for everything and for everyone, it could possibly be a little bit more effective. But I agree with the polarization point in politics, because we see that in so many ways. So I want to leave some time for Sabrina.
So I'll just say, and I'm gonna preface this with, what I'm about to say is Sabrina Griffith's opinion, and not that of the University of Tampa or NCORE or Ebony Ramsey. I have been saying for a number of years, and some of my colleagues have heard this, when you ask, are we social justice advocates responsible for the hostile culture? And it could be political culture, any culture. I do think there's some responsibility. When you're working with people that are in positions of privilege and have always known positions of privilege, and over the past few decades, we've constantly told them what they should and should not do without giving a why. You constantly tell me what I can and cannot do, but I've always been able to do whatever I want. And now you're telling me I can't, because that's not politically correct, or whatever that might be. Eventually, people say, I'm tired of being told what to do. It's not benefiting me. Now I'm going to take back my power. I think, again, with cancel culture, and kind of to wrap this in a bow, we really want to get back to a place where we're explaining the why. When I talk to organizations and I talk to corporations, we talk about the business case of diversity. How does it benefit you? So if someone says something offensive, I should not be saying, you can't say that. It's not politically correct. No, I should say, you should not say that. This is the harm that can be done. And this is how it can impact you if someone is harmed. I think when we start giving people the why and explaining to them the problematic ways that we are interacting with each other and how we can fix that to benefit all of us in so many different ways, then we can kind of shift our culture, and maybe it won't be as hostile.
Mm-hmm. Well, I wish we had more time, but we have ran out of time. This was so very interesting. I love it. I love it. There was a lot of learning to do here. But I also really am thankful that you bring the ideas of restorative justice, repairing harm, and extending grace. I think we need more of that grace this time around. I want everybody to join me in thanking Sabrina Griffith and Ebony Ramsey. Thank you so very much. And I want to remind our NCORE community that you can contact our presenters. They do have the information on the screen, and feel free to contact them directly, or if you want to contact us, Kathy can put our email in the chat, ncorewebinars@ou.edu. And we thank you very much, Ebony and Sabrina. This was really wonderful. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having us. We enjoyed it.
Thank you.
So everybody, this concludes our broadcast for this afternoon, and we will see you in a couple of weeks. Remember to submit your proposal for NCORE 2021. Everything is on our website. Thank you very much and have a good evening.
Thank you.